Two outlaws running from a posse that never stops, never sleeps, never gives up. Bolivia. A courtyard. Surrounded by an entire army. And they run out anyway, guns blazing, frozen in time before we see them die. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid ends with the most famous freeze frame in cinema, and it almost never happened because test audiences demanded to see the blood. Number 1, Newman and McQueen's billing war destroyed the dream cast. The original plan was perfect. Paul Newman as Butch, Steve McQueen as Sundance. Two of the biggest stars in Hollywood, both at their peak, both willing to work together. Then the billing discussion started, and everything collapsed into one of the most legendary ego battles in Hollywood history. Newman's agent demanded top billing. The reasoning was sound. Newman was the bigger star, had more Oscar nominations, commanded higher fees, had carried more films successfully. McQueen's agent countered that this was yesterday's math. McQueen was hotter right now, coming off Bullet, the face of modern cool. Newman represented old Hollywood establishment. McQueen was the future, and everyone knew it. The negotiations became absolute warfare. Newman offered to split billing alphabetically, which seemed reasonable. McQueen refused, saying alphabetical order still put Newman first in people's minds, creating a psychological hierarchy. McQueen suggested they alternate billing in different markets. Newman said that was insulting to both of them, treating them like children who couldn't share. They discussed shared billing with names at the same height on posters. McQueen's agent measured the names and said Newman's name was physically shorter. So even at the same font size it would still appear more prominent, occupying less vertical space and thus seeming more important. For months they fought over millimeters of poster space, size of font, placement of names above or below the title. Neither would compromise. Both threatened to walk. The studio tried mediating, offering various compromises. Split-screen credits. Rotating positions in different advertising materials. Diagonal placement, so neither was technically first. Every solution was rejected. Finally, McQueen walked away. He told his agent he wasn't playing second to anyone, especially not to Newman, who he considered past his prime and threatened by younger talent. Newman was furious. He felt McQueen was an arrogant kid who didn't understand Hollywood hierarchy, didn't respect the work Newman had done to build his career. McQueen felt Newman was a dinosaur clinging to relevance through contract fine print. Their egos killed what should have been the greatest Western pairing of the era, and Hollywood gossip columns feasted on the failure. The studio scrambled for a replacement. They needed someone with star quality, but not so big they'd demand equal billing with Newman. They needed someone who wouldn't threaten Newman's dominance, but could still hold the screen. They found Robert Redford, and Newman had never heard of him. Nobody had. Number 2, Redford was not handsome enough. Studio executives looked at Robert Redford's screen tests and worried deeply. He was handsome, sure, but not movie star handsome. Not leading man handsome. He looked too normal, too accessible, too much like someone you'd meet at a college football game. They wanted someone with Steve McQueen's edge, his danger, his coiled violence. Redford looked like he should be teaching elementary school, not robbing trains. The studio kept pushing director George Roy Hill to reconsider. Warren Beatty was interested and actually handsome in that classic movie star way. Jack Lemmon had the comedy chops. Even Marlon Brando was briefly considered, though how he'd play the young Sundance Kid nobody could explain. Hill rejected every suggestion. He'd worked with Redford on stage and knew Redford had something cameras loved, even if executives couldn't see it in screen tests. The argument escalated. The studio brought in focus groups, showed them pictures of potential Sundances. Redford scored lowest in the leading man appeal category. The studio presented this data to Hill as proof. See, audiences don't find him compelling. Hill said screen tests and photographs don't capture what Redford does in motion, how he inhabits space, how his stillness creates tension. Hill finally forced the issue. He demanded a screen test between Newman and Redford. Put them in a room together, see what happens. The studio agreed, hoping Redford would disappear next to Newman's supernova star power, and they could move on to someone else. The screen test revealed something nobody expected. Redford didn't disappear. He held his own. More than that, he made Newman better. Newman played off Redford's understated cool, found new rhythms in his own performance. They had chemistry nobody could explain or predict, an ease with each other that seemed impossible for two men who'd just met. The studio reluctantly approved Redford, but with humiliating conditions. Third billing after Newman and Catherine Ross. His name smaller on posters. limited promotional responsibilities. He was essentially being hired as Newman's supporting player, a sidekick elevated to co-lead only because McQueen's ego had created an opening. Redford accepted these terms because he knew what the studio didn't. This role would make him a star, and billing wouldn't matter once audiences saw him move, talk, smile. He had confidence the studio lacked. Years later, executives admitted they'd been catastrophically wrong. Redford wasn't just handsome enough. He redefined what leading man handsome could be. Natural instead of sculptural. Approachable instead of untouchable. Real instead of constructed. The studio wanted another McQueen, dangerous and coiled. They got something better. They got Redford being Redford, and audiences fell in love with someone who looked like he might actually exist in the world rather than on screen. Number 3. The bicycle scene was called career suicide. William Goldman's script included a scene where Butch rides a bicycle while Etta watches and Raindrops Keep Fallin on My Head plays. Studio executives read this and called Goldman immediately. Are you insane? This is a Western about outlaws. There are no bicycles in Westerns. There's definitely no pop music montages in Westerns. This isn't a musical. This is supposed to be Bonnie and Clyde with cowboys. Goldman explained his vision patiently. Butch showing off for Etta, being playful, revealing the man beneath the outlaw. The bicycle represented modernity coming to the West, the end of the cowboy era, obsolescence approaching. The song would be anachronistic, and that was the point. It would signal this wasn't a traditional Western, that audiences should expect something different. The studio said it would be embarrassing and audiences would mock it out of theaters. Cowboys ride horses. They wear spurs. They don't do cute bicycle tricks while pop songs play. This scene would destroy the film's credibility. Newman read the scene and loved it immediately. He thought it was charming, unexpected, human, showed vulnerability without dialogue. The studio said Newman was wrong, and they had market research proving it. George Roy Hill sided with Goldman and Newman completely. He said the bicycle scene would be the heart of the film, the moment that separated it from every other Western, the scene people would remember decades later. The studio said it would be the moment that killed the film, turned it into a joke, destroyed any dramatic tension. They wanted it removed from the shooting script entirely. Hill shot it anyway during a day when studio executives weren't visiting the set. He filmed it quickly, got what he needed, moved on to other scenes. When executives discovered what he'd done weeks later, they were absolutely furious. They said they'd cut it in editing, that Hill had wasted time and money on a scene that would never appear in the finished film. Hill said if they cut it, he'd remove his name from the film and tell every reporter why. Test audiences saw a rough cut without the bicycle scene as the studio's compromise. The film felt incomplete. Something was missing. They didn't know what exactly, but the rhythm was wrong. The emotional arc felt rushed. The studio grudgingly restored the scene, still convinced it would be mocked mercilessly. When the film opened, the bicycle scene became instantly iconic. People loved it. It was charming, funny, romantic, unexpected. The thing everyone said would kill the film became one of its most beloved moments, referenced and parroted for decades. Number 4. Burt Bacharach's song was considered uncommercial garbage. Burt Bacharach wrote, "Raindrops Keep Fallin' on My Head," specifically for the bicycle scene after reading Goldman's script. The studio hated it immediately. They said it was too pop, too lightweight, too modern for a Western. The melody was too cheerful for a film about doomed outlaws. They wanted something traditional, something with gravitas. Maybe a folk song. Maybe instrumental. Maybe no song at all, and just let the scene play with natural sound. Bacharach was already a successful songwriter with hits and respect in the industry. But this was his first major film commission. He believed in the song deeply, but the studio's rejection crushed him. He offered to write something different, something darker, something more appropriate. Hill said absolutely not. This song was perfect, captured exactly the right tone. The studio disagreed vehemently and commissioned 3 other composers to write alternative songs. None of the alternatives worked even slightly. They were too serious, too traditional, too forgettable, too obvious. Hill kept pushing for Bacharach's song, playing it for anyone who'd listen. The studio finally allowed it in test screenings, but expected audiences to hate it, to complain about the tonal mismatch. Test audiences loved it overwhelmingly. But the studio still wasn't convinced. Certain test audiences were being polite or didn't understand what films needed commercially. The song was nearly cut entirely even after positive test responses. Executives argued it was too risky for the film's commercial prospects. What if radio stations wouldn't play it because it was too associated with a Western? What if it seemed dated in a few years? What if younger audiences rejected it as too square, while older audiences rejected it as too pop? Hill threatened to quit the production entirely. Newman threatened to refuse all promotional duties. The studio finally caved but buried the song on the soundtrack release, giving it minimal promotional support, expecting it to disappear. Raindrops Keep Fallin on My Head won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It became one of the most recognizable, most played songs of the era. It topped the Billboard charts. Decades later, it's still instantly associated with the film, covered by countless artists. The uncommercial garbage song the studio tried desperately to kill became more famous and enduring than the film itself, generating millions in royalties the studio never expected. Number 5. The studio demanded a traditional Western. 20th Century Fox executives read Goldman's script repeatedly and kept asking the same frustrated question. Where's the Western? There are no big shootouts, no cavalry charges, no Indian attacks, no showdowns at high noon in dusty streets. It's just two guys running away and talking endlessly. This isn't a Western. It's a buddy comedy that happens to have horses and occasionally guns. They demanded extensive rewrites to make it more traditional and commercially viable. Add a major gunfight in the middle second act. Give the outlaws a climactic showdown with the super posse instead of just running. Make the Bolivia sequence shorter, less dialogue-heavy, more action-oriented. Goldman refused every suggestion. Hill refused to implement studio notes. Newman refused to participate in action-heavy rewrites. The studio brought in other writers secretly to add commercially necessary action sequences. These hired writers created elaborate shootouts, extended chase scenes, dramatic confrontations with lawmen. Hill read the rewrites and ceremonially threw them in the trash. He told executives they missed the entire point fundamentally. The film was deliberately avoiding Western cliches, showing the genre's obsolescence. It was about the end of the outlaw era, men running out of time and space and options. Traditional action would completely undermine the theme. Make it just another Western when the whole point was showing Westerns were dead. The studio insisted some additions be filmed anyway as insurance. Hill agreed, but filmed them wrong deliberately. Poor camera angles. Bad lighting. Obviously staged action. When executives saw the footage, they complained it looked terrible and unprofessional. Hill said that's because the scenes didn't belong in the film, didn't fit the tone or pacing. He'd proved his point through sabotage. The additions were cut before test screenings. This battle continued throughout production, a war of attrition. The studio kept pushing for conventional Western elements that would help marketing. Hill kept resisting, protecting Goldman's vision. The final film has almost no traditional Western action. The biggest gunfight happens completely off-screen. The climactic battle is shown as a freeze frame. Everything the studio wanted was deliberately avoided or subverted. Critics initially agreed with the studio, saying the film wasn't a real Western. But audiences didn't care about genre purity or marketing categories. They loved the characters, the dialogue, the humor. The film succeeded by ignoring what Westerns were supposed to be, creating something new from the genre's corpse. Number 6. The freeze frame ending tested as a complete disaster. Goldman's script ended with Butch and Sundance running into the courtyard, guns blazing toward certain death, and the image freezing just before they're killed. Test audiences absolutely hated it. They felt cheated, manipulated, denied the catharsis they'd earned through 2 hours of investment. They wanted to see the heroes die properly. They wanted closure, completion, an actual ending. The studio commissioned an alternate ending where the shootout plays out completely and graphically. Butch and Sundance fight desperately, get wounded, keep fighting courageously, finally collapse in slow motion as bullets rip through them. Blood. Pain. Death shown explicitly. It was dramatic, conclusive, traditional. Hill refused to film it, calling it emotional pornography. The studio used footage from earlier in the film and cut together a death scene without Hill's involvement or permission. They showed this version to test audiences. Response was better numerically, but not great emotionally. People felt the death scene was gratuitous, depressing, too much. They preferred the ambiguity of the freeze frame, even though they claimed they wanted the opposite. Their stated preferences contradicted their actual emotional responses. Hill explained that the freeze frame preserved the legends, let the outlaws live forever in that moment. By not showing the death explicitly, the film allowed Butch and Sundance to exist perpetually in audiences' minds as vital, alive, still fighting. The studio said that was pretentious film school nonsense that wouldn't sell tickets. Audiences wanted to see what happened, needed narrative completion. Hill assembled 2 carefully edited cuts. One with freeze frame. One with the manufactured death scene. He showed both to separate small audiences and studied the responses meticulously. People who saw the death scene left depressed, quiet, unengaged. People who saw the freeze frame left energized, talking loudly about the film, debating what happened next. The freeze frame created conversation, made the film live beyond its runtime. The death scene created silence and finality. The studio still pushed aggressively for the death scene based on initial test card responses. Hill said he'd take his name off the film publicly. Newman said he'd denounce the film in interviews. The studio realized they'd lose more from the controversy and negative publicity than they'd gain from the alternate ending. The freeze frame stayed, and it became one of the most iconic, most debated, most influential endings in cinema history. Number 7. Goldman watched his script get systematically destroyed. William Goldman sold his script for $400,000, a record at the time that made industry news. Then he watched helplessly as it got rewritten by literally everyone with an opinion. Producers added scenes they thought were missing. Studio executives changed dialogue they found awkward. Actors improvised new lines they felt were more natural. Directors modified character arcs they thought were unclear. By the time filming began, Goldman barely recognized his own work, felt like a stranger attending his creation's funeral. The studio hired him to be on set for rewrites, paying him additional money. But nobody actually listened to his input or respected his vision. He'd suggest dialogue that matched his original intent. Someone else would override him immediately. He'd explain a character's deep motivation. Someone would change it without discussion. He felt like a ghost haunting his own screenplay, present but powerless, watching but unable to affect anything. The most painful changes were to the carefully crafted dialogue. Goldman had spent months perfecting specific rhythms, particular word choices that created character. Actors changed lines casually to suit their personal style. Newman preferred shorter, punchier sentences. Redford added pauses and silences Goldman hadn't written, changing the rhythm completely. The carefully constructed dialogue became improvisation, and Goldman felt his craft being dismantled in real time. Goldman seriously considered removing his name from the film entirely. His agent talked him down forcefully, saying the script was still essentially his even if details had changed, that he'd regret walking away. Goldman watched dailies and felt physically sick. This wasn't his vision. This was something else entirely. Something he didn't recognize and wouldn't have written. Then he saw the rough cut assembled, and something completely unexpected happened. The changes worked. They actually worked. Newman's shorter sentences felt more natural, more like actual speech. Redford's pauses added tension, and subtext Goldman's words couldn't achieve alone. The improvisations brought spontaneity, life, reality that Goldman's precise writing couldn't capture. The film was different from his script, but it was better, more alive. Goldman later said watching the film evolve taught him the most crucial lesson of his career. Scripts are blueprints, not sacred texts. Collaboration improves them even when it feels like destruction. But during production, he felt like he was watching his baby get raised by strangers who didn't understand what they had, and every day was agony. Number 8. The Bolivia sequence made test audiences leave. The final third shifts dramatically to Bolivia. Different landscape. Different language. Different tone entirely. The charm and humor give way to desperation and violence and inevitable decline. Test audiences hated this shift viscerally. Some walked out during Bolivia scenes. Comment cards complained the film lost its way, became depressing, abandoned what made it enjoyable. The studio demanded the Bolivia sequence be shortened drastically or cut entirely. End the film in America where audiences are comfortable. Keep the tone light and comedic. Don't drag paying customers through a foreign country watching beloved heroes decline and fail. Hill refused absolutely. He said the Bolivia sequence was the entire thematic point. Without it, the film was just a lark, empty entertainment. With it, the film became tragedy about obsolescence. Studio executives argued audiences came for Paul Newman being charming and funny. They didn't come to watch him rob payrolls in a foreign country while everything falls apart and the fun dies. Hill said audiences came for a complete story, and stories need consequences, need characters to face the results of their choices.